For anyone who's lost a child and then been pregnant again, the constant fear and anxiety and stress and worry that you live with, it robs you of any joy that you have the opportunity to experience. I was paralyzed. And every morning I would pray, God, please let me keep this baby one more day. And every night when I went to bed, I would say, thank you so much for giving me one more day, because I didn't know how many days I would get with that child. And I did not believe I would ever get to meet it.
Welcome to The Human Experience. I'm Jennifer Peterkin, and this is episode 34, Mel's Story. At a young age, Mel was confronted with some health complications that forced her to begin thinking about and making decisions for her future. Faced with potential difficulties in pregnancy, Mel and her husband decided to begin having children right away. Their first pregnancy was pretty normal, luring her into a sense of confidence in her body and its ability to carry a baby to term. Mel's story of infant loss is deeply personal. Her grief and sorrow are surely felt by many who have walked a similar road. But for those of us who haven't experienced this loss, it can be difficult to understand the journey of healing that these women and their partners are on. Their loss is something they will carry with them forever. And while there is joy to be found amidst the sorrow, there is room for us to feel and experience both at the same time. Mel has written a book about her experience called Tiny Miracles, which is linked in the show notes, along with her Facebook page, which you can follow if you're interested in hearing more of Mel's story. A brief content warning before we begin: this story does contain conversations around miscarriages and infant loss.
Because of what I'm doing and the vulnerability that's attached to it, I want to be very aware and respectful of other people's space and stories. So this should never feel like an exploitative experience. It should only be empowering. So
I want to share my story, and that's why I decided to write the book, because I think more people need to be talking about it.
I will say I've had a lot of different people that I've interviewed thus far, and I think you're the first person that I've spoken to that is covering this subject.
Brought up this subject?
Yeah.
Do you want to know the statistic?
I do. Yeah, actually.
1 in 4 pregnancies ends in miscarriage. And so if you're sitting in a group of women and you look around, 25% of them are either struggling with getting pregnant or have lost a child, and nobody is talking about it.
I feel like I wouldn't think that it would be that high, because it seems like the most quote unquote natural thing for a woman, right? To have a child.
I think that's where the silence comes in, because, and I may be speaking out of turn for other women, but women think this is genetic. This is my body. It was born to have babies. Like, this is what my purpose is. And when that's not possible, they start to feel ashamed. They start to feel depressed. They start to think, I'm broken. There's something wrong with me. I must be damaged. What's wrong with me? That's why they're not talking about it, I think, because there's some sort of stigma attached to it that's totally unnecessary and totally untrue. But they think if I'm not doing what my body was literally made to do, what's wrong with me? And I think that's why they're not open to sharing it. I think I was silent for 12 years because when you're in the thick of it, those are the things that's the hardest to talk about it when you're in the middle of it. But when you come out on the other side and you can see God's hand in the whole plan and look back and see what its purpose was for, you go, oh, okay. And that's why I decided to share my story, because I know I'm not the only one. I cannot be the only one. And you say at the end of your shows that I want you to know you're not alone. And that's the whole point of me sharing my story, is to let women know they're not alone. They're not the only one. There's nothing wrong with them. Unfortunately, this is happening to a lot of us. So my story, I guess, kind of begins in high school. I got diagnosed with an autoimmune disease when I was 18 years old. And the autoimmune disease is progressive. It's lupus and rheumatoid arthritis, and they call it mixed connective tissue disease. And I was 18 years old sitting in Landstuhl, Germany in a military hospital. And the rheumatologist basically tells me, we don't know how progressive or how quickly your disease will progress. You may progress very, very slowly and have many great years ahead of you, and then have a tough time when you're older. You may progress really quickly. We don't know. And so he did say, for lupus patients specifically, there could be a lot of complications with having children. And so you might want to think about starting a family early. No pressure, but just think about it. And at the time, I brought my high school sweetheart to the hospital with me to hear this news with my parents. My parents were there. My dad was my sponsor, so he was providing my medical care. And my high school sweetheart and I pretty much knew that we wanted to get married, but this news was really heavy. And I wanted him to have an out. So I was like, what if this isn't what he wants? He doesn't want to commit to somebody who's going to be facing all these challenges their entire life. Like, now's his chance to get out.
Yeah.
And it was about 4.5 hours away from our house. And so we had a long drive home. And he was like, I'm not going anywhere. I'm not going anywhere. So that was age 18. We got married when we were 22. Our first child was born when we were 23, Jordana. And the pregnancy was fairly easy. I had very bad morning sickness, like practically the whole pregnancy, but she made it to 36 weeks. She was born a teeny tiny bit early, didn't need to spend any time in the NICU. We went home after a few days. She didn't need any oxygen or anything. And I thought, well, that was easy.
Truly, yeah.
And we loved being parents, and we loved Jordana. She was just the sweetest. She still is just the sweetest baby. And flash forward about a year later, I found myself pregnant again. And I was working, and I went to work, and I work for a financial institution. So just so you can kind of visualize standing in the lobby of this financial institution, welcoming people as they come in the door, and good morning, what can we help you with? And all of a sudden, I felt this immense pressure bearing down in my low abdomen. And I ran to the bathroom, and pieces of tissue were falling out of me. And I was very confused by it. I didn't know what it was. I didn't want to assume what it was. I asked to be excused from work. I called the doctor, and they didn't even see me. They didn't even have me come in. They're like, oh, sounds like you had a miscarriage. And I was like, what do I do? What do I need? They said, just stay home and take Advil for the pain and try to wait it out. It could take a day. It could take a few days, but take it easy, rest, drink lots of fluids. And we're sorry this happened, but sometimes that's what happens. And that was kind of the response that I got. I thought it was very cold. I thought it was very strange that they didn't even want me to come in. It was just, yep, sounds like you're having a miscarriage. And so I was kind of in shock. I was very early on in the pregnancy, so we didn't really have time to wrap our heads really around what had just happened. And so if I'm being totally honest, we didn't grieve terribly with that one. It was sad. It was awful, but it didn't break my heart the way that some of the other ones did. So the following year, we tried to get pregnant again. We waited a year, tried for another pregnancy. We were intentional about it. We got pregnant. We waited until like 8 weeks to tell people. And I'm not kidding. We had an announcement at our birthday dinner. His parents were there. My parents were there. We told everybody that we were expecting, and we thought, okay, this is the one, this is it. And a week later, I had scheduled my first appointment for around 9 weeks or so. And I was sitting at work again a week later, and I felt that same intense pressure. And I told my boss, oh, I think something's wrong. And she's like, how do you know? And I said, this is very familiar. And I went to the restroom and I was spotting. And she said, well, call and see if you can get your appointment moved up, see if they can see you sooner. And so they said they could get me in the next day. And they were like, just hang tight, hang on, we'll get you in the next day. And that afternoon, I went running to the restroom. I felt so much pressure bearing down on my low abdomen. It felt like my insides were going to fall out. It felt like I was going to explode. And I went into the bathroom at work, and I'll be slight with the details. I lost the baby in the bathroom. And that was one of the most fearful, terrifying, awkward, uncomfortable, scary, confusing moments that I've ever had in my entire life. And I describe it in detail in my book because I know there's so many other women that go through that, and I don't want them to think I've done it by myself. I want them to go, oh my God, that's what happened to me. That happened to me too. And so I didn't spare any of the details in the book, but I talk about kind of standing there debating, what do I do? Do you flush? Do you not flush? What do you do? Like, I didn't know what to do. But I got myself together, and I came out of the restroom, and my boss was standing in the hallway, and she just wrapped her arms around me and let me sob. She just let me sob into her shoulder. And I said, I lost it. And she said, I know, sweetie, I'm so sorry. And she said, you need to go to the hospital. You need to go right now. I had lost a lot of blood. And at that point, I didn't know how much blood was safe for me to lose. I just knew that does not look healthy. So I got to the hospital, and they did a full exam to make sure that everything had cleared itself properly so I don't get an infection and those types of things. And they called it a successful miscarriage. Oof. You had a very clean, successful miscarriage. And I said, okay, well, what now? And she's like, what do you mean? And I said, well, this is the second time that this has happened to me in a year. Is something wrong? And they said, oh, no, sometimes these things just happen. And I get that these doctors, this is their life. They deal with this every day. Mm-hmm. And so when you do something like, let's say you're a CSI agent or something like that, you deal with forensics all the time, you work at a coroner's office, they become numb to those types of things. It just doesn't really faze them anymore. But I think they forget who they're talking to.
Absolutely.
You're talking to a mother who had prepared her heart to receive this child, bring it into her home, had been envisioning what the nursery was going to look like, has been thinking about names, has been looking at baby outfits when we go to the store. And then you just say, well, it happens sometimes. And I thought that cannot be the appropriate response. It was very shocking that this is their normal response, at least in my experience. So we waited a little while to try again. And in 2012, so my daughter's 5 by this time, we planned another pregnancy and successfully got pregnant. So clearly getting pregnant was not my issue back then. That was not the issue. So I at least was blessed in that way that I could get pregnant. Yeah. And this time I told my doctor, I said, I want to see a specialist, someone who deals in high-risk pregnancies, because I have a feeling I'm in the high-risk category. I have an autoimmune disorder. I've already been warned that children could be challenging for me. I've lost 2 in a row. And so I started pushing. And this is where I start telling women, you have to advocate for yourself. You have to advocate for your health. Nobody is going to do that but you. And so when something doesn't feel right, it's probably because it's not right. Ask for that second opinion. Go get a different doctor if you don't like the answers that your doctor is giving you. So I went to a specialist, and I had both my regular OB and my specialist tag teaming it at the same time. And I would have an appointment one week with one, an appointment the other week with the other. And I was very grateful. They monitored me very closely in the beginning because they already knew I had 2 first-term miscarriages. They're monitoring me very closely starting at like week 6. I saw a doctor every single week. And at 12 weeks, I went into the specialist's office with my husband. He was with me every single visit because at this point he was just as nervous as I was. And they did an ultrasound. The heart rate was 165. And she said, you guys can breathe a sigh of relief now. She said, this baby has a strong heartbeat. And she said, I just want you to take a deep breath. There is less than a 3% chance that anything could happen after this point. So please, please just relax. And I said, okay. And that made us feel so good. And I know it's just a statistic, but that gave us the confidence to not live in fear every single day. So the following week, I had an appointment at my regular OBGYN's office. And my husband had to work. And he said, do you want me to take off to come with you? And I said, no. I got this. I can do this. Remember, there's less than a 3% chance. I said, we're going to be fine. So this was the one where they were going to do the over the belly ultrasound to try to find the heartbeat over the top of your belly. I was far enough along at that point. So they took me into the room and had the monitor on my belly. And they kept moving it and kept moving it and kept moving it. She said, well, sometimes these little guys try to get away from us, and sometimes they're facing your spine and we can't catch them at the right angle, or maybe they're curled up in a weird way. So she said, is it okay with you if we go in and do a vaginal ultrasound instead? And I said, yeah, do what you got to do. I'm not going to fight it. And they took me in for the vaginal ultrasound. It took less than 30 seconds for my doctor to look at the screen. And she went, oh, honey, I'm so sorry. And I was naked, laying on the bed by myself with my feet up in stirrups in an ice cold room with a paper towel over my lap. And I was like, wait, no, that can't be right. Like, they just told us. So now I'm starting to argue with her. Go get somebody else. And she's like, okay, I'll go get somebody else. And she comes back in with another doctor, and the other doctor confirmed that the baby had passed. And according to the measurements, it had been 6 days.
Oh, my word.
So it had passed literally right after our last doctor's appointment, and I'd been carrying it for a week. So, of course, I sobbed, and I said, what now? Do I take a pill? Do I go home and wait? They're like, oh, no, you're too far along. You can't do that again. That's not safe. And I said, well, what do you mean? They said, you have to have surgery because the baby's too big. And at that point, I was like, so when? I kind of wanted it to happen soon, like the next day. And because of scheduling and bed availability and all of this hospital political jargon, I had to wait another 8 days.
Oh my gosh.
For surgery. So that was in and of itself the most uncomfortable. I don't even know how to describe that. I'm sure another woman that I talked to would be able to tell me what that felt like for her, but I don't even know how to describe what it's like to walk around pregnant, carrying a child that you know is not living. It feels wrong. It felt wrong. But at the same time, you don't want to let it go. So we went home. Our daughter knew that we were pregnant, was expecting a baby brother or sister. She was 5. And we sat down and explained to her that her baby sibling had gone to live with Jesus. And she hugged me and said, it's okay, Mama, it's okay. And I was crying. And I went in to have the surgery the following week. My mom came with me and my husband. And this is the first time that I really remember in my life having a full-blown panic attack. I think this is when my anxiety started. But I went into what was a surgical clinic. It was not a full-blown hospital. It was a clinic where they perform daytime procedures in and out outpatient procedures. You have your surgery, you go home. And they do them all day long, one after the other. And so I checked in. I'm literally shaking. And my doctor at the time was unable to perform the surgery. So she had one of her colleagues do it. I had never met him before. And so this man that I've never known, have never met, comes up to my bed to introduce himself and says, I'm going to be performing your surgery today. And I started questioning him. In my irrational, panicky state of mind and my Christian upbringing, I all of a sudden had this irrational fear that I'm having an abortion. I'm having an abortion. You can't take the baby. You can't have it. You can't take it. I can't have an abortion. And he said, well, sweetie, you can't keep carrying it. You could get sick. You could get an infection. And I looked at my mom and I said, Mom, they have to be wrong. It can't actually be true that the baby's dead. What if they made a mistake? What if the baby's heart is still beating? And my mom said, they would not have made a mistake like that. They would not have told you your baby was dead if it was still alive. She said, they wouldn't have made a mistake like that. You have to let them. And he said, listen, for your comfort, we don't have ultrasound equipment here. But if you feel the need to cancel your surgery today and go back to the OBGYN's office, you can have another ultrasound and then you can try to reschedule. And my mom said, you can't afford to wait any longer. You need to do this today. And she held my hand and talked me through it. And he said, would it be okay if I gave her something to relax? They basically had to drug me to calm me down so that they could start an IV and do all the things that they needed to do because I was literally panicking, like, I'm doing the wrong thing. I can't be going through this. I'm doing the wrong thing. So I think that, that was the toughest loss that we've been through. That was our last loss. That was 2012. And, we kind of took a break from trying. Our hearts were literally broken at that point. And I told my mom, I can't kill any more babies. I just can't do it. Flash forward, my job transferred me to Dallas 2 years later. And our hearts were starting to heal. And we had a new place. And Jordana's 7 years old. And she's an amazing kid, amazing kid. She got into ice skating and she's doing figure skating and all these things. And I got introduced to a new OBGYN here. And when we're doing the intake forms, she has to get my medical history. And she says, well, how many times have you been pregnant? And I said 4. And she writes it down. And how many children do you have? And I said 1. And she goes, wait, what? And she said, okay, tell me what happened there. And I started to tell her my story. And she said, well, don't you want to know why you keep losing these babies? And I said, is that possible? And she said, yes. It's called standard medical care. It's possible to figure out what's going on. We can try. And so she referred me to a friend, a hematologist friend of hers. And for anybody listening, a hematologist studies the blood, but they sent me to an oncology office. And I had no idea that oncology and hematology were the same thing.
Oh, yeah, me either.
So I get these orders that says Texas Oncology, and they're sending me to an oncologist. And I start panicking, going, what did she not tell me? What does she know that I don't know? And he studies my blood. It turns out he does both things. And he comes in first visit and he says, I have answers for you. And I know why you keep losing these babies. And I said, you do? And he said, it's very simple, actually. I mean, science and medical stuff for them is just very black and white. It's very simple, actually. He said, a lot of women will have a blood clotting disorder, but they normally have one type of blood clotting disorder. It's either in their platelets or it's in their proteins. And we help them with that. And he said, you are a very unique case. You have 2 blood clotting disorders. You have one in your platelets and in your protein. And when you get pregnant, your estrogen levels rise, and estrogen causes your blood to clot more. And he said, so essentially what happens is every time you get pregnant, you throw a blood clot to your uterus and it cuts off the circulation to the babies. And I was like, oh my gosh. And he said, the good news is we can fix it. And there's medicine for that. And we can get you to full term if you decide you want to have any more kids. And I said, oh my gosh, like we had it. We didn't know if we wanted to try. We kind of had a deadline in our mind that by the time Jordana was 10, we would stop trying. We didn't really want them that far apart. And so I was just like, okay, well, we have a few years left. Like we can make this happen. And we never got pregnant again.
Wow. Never
got pregnant again. And flash forward to fall of 2017, Jordana's 10. And she's 10 going on 11. She's like at the end of her 10-year-old year. And I was suffering from a lot of abdominal pain. I kept having cysts that would form and rupture and form and rupture. And I got diagnosed with endometriosis. And I did talk with a fertility specialist at one point towards the end of that year just to see like what are my options. And she said, you can try to have surgery to try to clean it all out and give yourself another chance. And she said, but you have a lot of scar tissue built up inside your uterus, probably from that D&C, and it's blocked off your fallopian tubes. And she said, and I'm telling you right now, nothing's getting through that sucker. Wow. And I was like, okay. And I found out she was out of network and she couldn't perform the surgery. So I went back to my regular OBGYN and she said, what are your priorities? And I said, I want to feel healthy. I want to get better. At that point, my quality of life was really poor. I was in a ton of pain all the time, calling in sick to work. I had missed a week's worth of work in October when a cyst ruptured because I could barely stand up from the pain. I said, I just need to get healthy. And she said, well, I can go in there and clean you out and I can attempt to preserve whatever I can preserve in the off chance that you might get pregnant again. But she said, what do you want me to do if I find a bad ovary or your uterus doesn't look healthy? What do you want me to do? And this was the turning point in my life, I think.
Okay.
I said, I am content. I am at peace. I have one gorgeous, beautiful, talented, smart daughter. And if that's all we're going to have, I'm completely okay with that. And you do whatever you need to do. Take it all. I don't care. You take whatever you need to take. And she said, okay, that's what I needed to hear. So she scheduled a surgery. That was December of 2017. She scheduled a surgery for the following March. My husband's a teacher, so when he would be on spring break and would be able to help me with my recovery. And she said, I need you to come in January on the 5th day of your next cycle to get updated ultrasounds so we know what new cysts we're dealing with and what the growth looks like. So I need new pictures before I go in there. And I said, okay. So that was the plan. 5th day, next cycle, coming in, ultrasound. And when you have endometriosis, your cycle is very predictable. And based on the pain that you're feeling, if you're on day 11 or day 17, like you can time your cycle based on how your body feels in that moment. And your cycles are extremely predictable. Your ovulation cycles are extremely predictable because the pain adjusts with those things. And day 1 of my cycle came and went, but I didn't start. And I thought, well, that's really odd. But I was under a lot of stress and I was really starting to worry that the endometriosis was starting to affect my body as well. Day 2 came and went. Day 3 came and went. So finally, day 5 comes and I was like, I'm supposed to be at the hospital today getting an ultrasound and I haven't started yet. And so I took a pregnancy test and it said it was positive. And I thought, that's not right. I seriously believed this is not right. My body is now giving off false hormones. And I talked to my husband. I said, look at this. And he's like, oh, sweetie. He said, your body is so messed up at this point. It just doesn't even know what it's doing anymore. You need to call the doctor. So I called the doctor and I said, this is really strange. I haven't gotten my cycle. Just took a test. It's digital, probably inaccurate. He said, come in and let's find out what's going on. So I went in and did a blood test. I'm waiting in the doctor's office for her to come in. And she walks in the door and she goes, well, what do we have here? And I was like, I don't know what's going on. She said, you're pregnant. And I said, how? And she goes, well, do you want me to tell you how? And I said, no, but I mean, how? I said, they literally just told me last month we could not have any more children. And she said, I don't know what to tell you. Some people just get lucky. And so then I was like, okay, well, what now? Like, what? I have endometriosis, but I'm having a baby. She said, don't worry about that. When you're pregnant, the hormones actually kill off the endometriosis and you'll get better temporarily. And then after the pregnancy is over, your body will eventually revert back to normal. We'll deal with that later. She said, right now, you need to go to the hematologist's office. You need to get your shot. You need to get your injection. We need to make sure we give this baby every single chance that we can. And for anyone who's lost a child and then been pregnant again, the constant fear and anxiety and stress and worry that you live with, it robs you of any joy that you have the opportunity to experience. Most people, when they're pregnant, are glowing and excited and happy and planning. I could not do any of those things. I was paralyzed. And every morning I would pray, God, please let me keep this baby one more day. And every night when I went to bed, I would say, thank you so much for giving me one more day. Because I didn't know how many days I would get with that child. And I did not believe I would ever get to meet it. And I was around 13 weeks when I was laying in bed and I was praying, thank you for letting me keep this child one more day. And I'm not gifted in hearing God's voice. A lot of people are, and they say they hear him all the time, or they'll be given a scripture or something like that. Now, I had several scriptures that got me through those 12 years, and every single chapter in my book has a scripture that is at the top that got me through. But I didn't audibly hear him at any point until that night. I was laying in bed and I heard him say, tell your story. And I was like, what does that mean? And the next night he said, tell your story. And I was like, what does that mean? And the third night he said, tell your story. And I said, I don't know what you're talking about. I don't know what that means. And I heard him say, write your book. I had always wanted to write something. I did not know what it would be. When I was a child, I wrote short stories all the time. I wrote poetry all the time. Writing was my skill all through high school. When I graduated high school, the Navy offered me a scholarship to be a journalist. And my dad said, don't do that. So I knew that I enjoy writing. And I always wanted to do something, but I didn't know what it was going to be. And he said, write your book. But at that point, I didn't know if our child was going to make it to the end or not. And I thought, I can't write a book that doesn't have an ending. So I got to 30 weeks and went, OMG, I think this baby might be actually coming. I had not let anyone plan me a baby shower. I had not bought a car seat. I had not bought a single piece of baby furniture. I had not bought a single piece of clothing. And at that point, we knew that the sex was a boy. So we knew that the child we were carrying was a boy. And I was very excited about the possibility of having a little boy. We had a little girl, and to be able to have a boy and experience both, I actually felt excitement around the thought of raising a boy. But the thought of planning for that child was terrifying.
Yeah.
I did not want to build a nursery only to have to tear it down later. I did not want to have to purchase things only to have to return them. I didn't want anybody to throw me a party to have to cancel it or take all the gifts back or whatever the case was. And so I refused. People were asking left and right what they could do, and I refused. And at 30 weeks, I called my mom having another panic attack. I think I might actually be having this baby, and I'm not ready. I don't have anything. I don't have a car seat. I don't have a crib for it to sleep in. What was I thinking? And she's like, calm down. It's okay. People will take care of you. If you want a shower, we will get it. Our last child was 11 and a half years earlier, and it was all girl stuff. So I didn't have anything for this baby. We'd gotten rid of everything. And after our last experiences, we did not hold on to a single item. We just let it go. And now I'm having a different kind of panic attack. So I'm like, I'm not ready, and it's coming. And I had some complications toward the end, but they got us through it. I had to do bed rest. I was extremely low on iron. I was going to my hematologist's office 3 times a week for iron infusions by IV. They took 3 hours each treatment. It's kind of like going for dialysis.
Yeah.
And at that point, I wasn't allowed to drive either.
Oh, wow.
I was a hot mess. But it was anything. You tell me to do it, I'm going to do it. If you tell me to take my medicine, I'm going to take my medicine. And so we're doing 3 injections per day at that point in my abdomen, plus aspirin to prevent more blood clotting, and the iron infusions and everything else. I went into labor 2 times before my 37th week, and they stopped it with medication and sent me back home again. Put your legs up. Don't move. And on the first day of my 37th week, so there's this syndrome. The hospitals call it wimpy white boy syndrome. And it's legit. It's a medical term, but apparently Caucasian boys are born with the weakest lungs, and they have the hardest time breathing. And so 37 weeks is the bare minimum. They really want a Caucasian male to be born at 39 weeks if possible. 37 weeks is still very risky because their lungs develop the slowest and they're going to need the most help breathing. So first day of the 37th week, I go back into labor, and these nurses are like, no, not today, ma'am. You're not doing this today. And we knew because of my blood clotting disorder that we were going to perform a C-section. So it could be in a controlled environment. We were hoping it would be 39 weeks. But this being my 5th pregnancy, my body was like ready to go, which is odd to say 5th pregnancy because I've got 2 babies. But I went into labor. They could not stop it. And we ended up doing a C-section that evening. And my doctor was not available. I had an on-call doctor.
No.
Some guy I'd never met. Again. He was so nice. And they tried to put me at ease. I was very much uncomfortable and panicking. I'm still waiting for something to go wrong. And the anesthesiologist was even holding my hand, and he said, I can't give you anything until they get that baby out. But when they get that baby out, do I have permission to give you something to help you relax? Because I was shaking on the table. But this male OBGYN gets down to the baby, and I hear him go, oh my God, he's looking right at me. And Liam was born with his eyes wide open and his fists raised up in the air like Hercules, shaking his fists as if to say, I'm here, I made it, I did it, I told you. And this doctor could not believe he wasn't crying. Wow. He was staring him straight in the eye like, I told you. And so if you check out the book, the first picture you'll see is on the cover, and it's a picture of my daughter's baby feet in the palm of my hand. The very last page of the book is the picture of Liam with his arms raised up above his head and his eyes wide open.
Now I have to check this out.
And you talked about your opa, and you said he had so many reasons to be bitter and angry and resentful, but he wasn't. And I write about that in my very last chapter. I'm not bitter. I'm not angry. I'm not resentful. I'm very grateful. I'm grateful that I've been blessed with 2 amazing kiddos, and I do call them tiny miracles. Birth in and of itself is 100% a miracle, but when you've been told you can't have any more children and God says, well, watch what I can do, you really believe in miracles at that point. And I know one day I'll get to meet my other 3 kids, and I don't know what they'll look like. I don't know if they're boys or girls or what, but I know they're waiting for me. And so I'm not angry. I'm just grateful. And I think that all of those challenging experiences have made me a better mom. I am not naturally a patient person. And so when we have those like challenging moments, I'm like, remember what you did to get him here, right? He's 5 right now. Oh, he's almost 5. I'm sorry. He's almost 5. This September, he'll be turning 5. And we go through moments, and I'm just like, oh, you are challenging me, but I'm so grateful to be your mother. I remember what I went through to get you here.
Yeah.
And I think you have to have those challenges to appreciate the blessings. And yeah, I think that it just makes you appreciate the finer things in life, like the little things in life that much more.
The little things that are actually the big things, right? Because let's be real. Those 2 kids that's a pretty big deal.
Pretty major.
Yeah.
Major miracles.
I mean, that's some trauma. And that is, there's more and more conversations being had about traumatic experiences and what that does to us as people, what it does to our brains, what it does to our health. And because this topic is not spoken about very often or very widely, I think sometimes we can forget how much trauma, birth is trauma anyway. Like a naturally healthy, everything went exactly the way it was supposed to birth is traumatic.
Still traumatic.
Yeah.
Yes, it is.
You throw any wrench into that system and the trauma is just, so when you're telling me that your anxiety was born out of these experiences, I'm over here nodding my head like, how could it not be? How could you not react like that? I have never had this experience, but talking about how you would refuse to plan for your son, I understand that in a way that I almost can't, right? Because that's not something that I've walked through. But where you're coming from, it's very clear that this has been a journey that truly has shaped who you are and has changed your life, good or bad, right?
Absolutely.
And you started this off with a statistic and you talk about advocating for yourself and advocating for women, and you wrote a book. And so I think it's so beautiful that what you're doing now is you are putting your story out there for others to hear that they aren't alone and there is something that they can do to help themselves. What, I know you had your middle of the night moments about your book, which was fabulous. What kind of pushed you to the next step of advocacy?
Knowing that there's more women out there that weren't talking about it. And it started really with my inner immediate circle. People in my family and friends of mine that I knew had experienced something similar to me. And I started with a private, it's still out there, a private Facebook group called Tiny Miracles. That's a support group for women. And I invited anyone struggling with infertility or infant loss to join us. It's a faith-based group. Let us pray for each other. Let us talk to each other about the hard stuff. Let us ask each other questions. And one of the things that I learned through this group, because I told them, invite other women that need support. And it grew from 3 members to 100 and something members, and it's still growing, but because it is literally word of mouth and personal invitation, this is how people are finding this support system.
Sure.
But like for Mother's Day, I posed a question and I said, for those of you who have lost a child and maybe don't have a living child on earth, how do you like to be honored on Mother's Day, or do you not want to be honored? What feels natural to you? And what's interesting is there were several different responses, but about 75% of the women that responded said, I wish people would acknowledge me on Mother's Day. I wish my spouse would bring home flowers and remember that we did have a baby. I wish I would get a card in the mail. I've never gotten a card in the mail. And it's something we don't think to ask. And I would not have known what they wanted or what their heart was if I didn't ask. And so I think instead of assuming what people want, we should start to ask, what makes you feel valued and appreciated? How can I honor you in this experience that you've been in? And if they want space and they don't want to talk about it, that's okay too.
Yeah. And I think you pretty much just answered this question, but just to phrase it a different way, sometimes, and this is not an excuse because there are a lot of these kinds of things out in the world. You know, my experience with domestic violence is that people generally either don't want to talk to you about it at all, or they want to know the gory details of it, right? It's like either I'm just not even going to acknowledge that this is a thing, or, you know, tell me the details. And obviously not everybody, but there is this kind of people either go to these polar opposites and don't necessarily know how to walk that middle path. What would you tell people who are unsure of how to approach somebody that they know is struggling with infertility or infant loss? What is the best way to reach out, to make that initial contact, to be a safe space for mothers?
Absolutely. I think just coming alongside a friend and saying, you know, I don't know what you're going through, but I want you to know that I'm here for you and that you can talk to me if you want to, anytime, with whatever you feel comfortable sharing. And if you just want someone to sit with you, I'll be here to sit with you. If you want a distraction and you want to go catch a comedy show or you want to go to a concert, I can do that too. But I just want you to know that I am here for you in whatever capacity you need. Please lean on me. I want to support you in any way that I can. And I think, you know, there's the overachievers who like are bringing meals over and intruding on your space and petting your head and telling you everything's going to be okay when you know that's not true and you really don't want anybody touching you and in your space right now. And then there's the underachievers who are like, I'm just going to watch from a distance and they'll let me know if they need me. And that's not going to happen. And so I think the best friend that we can be is just to say, I'm here in whatever capacity that is. I want you to know that I want to be here for you when you're ready, however you're ready.
That's beautiful and so important. So important. You know, I think there is beauty in just being able to hold space and sit in a tension and not have to solve a problem, right? So there is nothing you can say or do that is going to fix this for someone that is traveling this journey. And so that shouldn't ever be our goal. We are not able to fix that.
Right.
But the ability to hold space and tension is, I think, a very divine act and one of the best things that we can do for each other. It holds a lot of weight to be able to bear witness with somebody and to be able to bear somebody else's burdens. So I think it's a very poignant thing and something that we should all probably be practicing, because maybe we're not naturally good at it, right? Maybe we want to fill space. We want to fill those voids because we start to feel uncomfortable. But discomfort isn't the worst thing in the world. And we should be able to get a little more okay with feeling uncomfortable.
Yes, absolutely. And we have to remember it's when it's a friend that's going through it and you're just the support person, it's not about you. It's not about what you want or what you think is the right thing to do. It's about what that person needs and you meet them where they are.
Yep. And one thing that I say a lot is that healing isn't linear. And so a lot of times when you walk through trauma, alongside somebody, especially if you yourself have not experienced your own trauma, it can be very difficult to understand. Or not even if you haven't experienced, if you haven't processed your own trauma, it can be difficult to understand why someone isn't walking a straight path, right? Why they seem better and then things get worse, and then it gets better and then it goes worse, and then it goes parallel. And it's not a straightforward path upwards mobility. It is all over the place. It's messy, it's chaotic, but that is the beauty of healing, right? And we heal again, and there's different layers to healing. And so that's part of the human experience.
Yes. And you described that in relation to trauma. If you exchange the word trauma with the word grief, it's the exact same process.
Yes.
Up, downs, forwards, backwards, 2 steps forward, 3 steps back. I'm okay, I'm not okay, over and over and over again for the rest of your life.
Yeah. And we shouldn't expect there to be an end date. And that's something that I think we need to let go of, because we're all just waiting on that time frame to be like, all right, and now we're done with this, and we're going to not focus on that anymore. And it's just not a reality, because the reality is these things change us and they shape us. And so you will never not be a version of yourself that hasn't known these experiences. You have lived through this. This is who you are. And while it's not your identity, it has shaped you. So I think it's a really important act to be able to love in that way, to be a friend in that way.
Yeah, and it does take practice. Nobody's naturally good at that.
No.
We don't know the right thing to say or
No.
the right thing to do. We have to awkwardly fumble our way through it.
Yes. And so, grace upon grace, absolutely.
Yes.
But, and you can also tell when somebody's doing their best.
Yes.
Right?
They're trying.
Yeah.
They're trying.
You're trying. That's great.
Yeah.
Well, that's beautiful. I love it. I know you're doing more interviews. Where can people find your book?
It's available on Amazon, and it's available on Barnes & Noble.
Okay, great.
And it has its own page at Tiny Miracles - the book on Facebook, just so you can follow for any future podcast episodes that get released, or if I'm going to be doing any appearances or book signings, I'll always post the updates there for people to see.
Perfect. Then you said that's on Facebook?
Yes.
All right, awesome. Well, definitely we'll post links to everything in the show notes as well. Okay. So you've listened to a couple episodes, so you probably know what's coming next. I do ask everybody one question before, at the end of every podcast episode, which is based on the lens of your own experience. What does compassion mean to you?
There's a phrase, it's the platinum rule, not the golden rule, right? The golden rule is to treat people the way you want to be treated. The platinum rule is to treat people the way they want to be treated. And I think once we start to practice that, we're practicing that compassion. We're putting ourselves in the other person's shoes, and we're saying, I want them to feel good about themselves. I want them to feel loved. I want them to feel valued. And that is how you show other people compassion. You love them the way that they want to be loved in the moment, whatever that is that they need from you right then and there.
Beautifully said. I've not heard of that as the platinum rule, but I think I'm going to be using that from now on. I love that. Well, Mel, thank you so much for doing this, for being open, being vulnerable. It's not easy, and what you walked through is hard, and no one should have to have walked through what you've walked through. But I appreciate your generosity and your openness and your wanting to help other women and parents get through this.
Thank you for letting me share.
Thank you so much for listening to The Human Experience. If you enjoyed this episode and you'd like to help support the podcast, please subscribe, share it with others, and leave a rating and review on your favorite platform. Everyone has a story, and I'd love to hear yours, so be sure to check out the show notes for more information about how to stay in touch. Do good and take care.